Okay, here I am with Debbie Bulten, Summit of Lhotse. Yesterday we climbed Everest. She's the first Canadian woman to climb Everest and Lhotse, peak to peak, 24 hours. Congratulations, Debbie. Great job. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, beautiful views up here.
Hello and welcome to Explore with Lori Ference. In this episode, I'm speaking with Debbie Bulten, a legendary Canadian mountaineer. Now, last year, Debbie set a new Canadian women's record when she reached the peak of Lhotse, which is the world's fourth highest mountain, within a mere 24 hours of climbing Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain. In this episode, we're going to take you on a visual journey of that expedition, starting with a yak bridge that Debbie, her team, and the yaks had to cross on their way up to Everest Base Camp. I hope you enjoy.
There's many bridges that we cross in the Khumbu Valley on our way up to base camp. So this one actually is called a yak train because the yaks are their primary source of moving supplies up the mountain. So they have these yak trains going across, and you don't want to get in the way of a yak train because they will literally push you off the bridge. So when you see a yak train coming, you hightail it to the other side of it. But there's multiple bridges that go across the Khumbu in the Khumbu Valley, and yeah, this is kind of a frequent sight. On our way up, we saw many yak trains going up.
A lot of weight that bridge has on it.
Yeah, it's a little intimidating actually when you go on it. Will it hold me? Will it hold them? Yeah, lots of things are going through your mind when you see that.
Yeah. And how long did it take you to get to base camp?
The trek took about 12 days to get to base camp. So we fly in from Kathmandu to this little airport. It's kind of a scary airport. And it takes us 12 days from that airport to trek up. So from that point, there's no vehicles, no cars. It's all foot traffic. So you're going through the Khumbu Valley, staying in these little tea houses on the way, and just gradually, incrementally increasing your altitude as you go, a couple of feet each day. And then the days that we have breaks on, like our off days, we would just do acclimatization hikes up and down to get a little bit more exposure to the altitude, and then we'd move up the next day. And so yeah, moving through the airport somewhere around 9,000 feet, and base camp is 17,500. So it took us 12 days to get 8,500 feet.
And you're getting acclimatized the entire time that you're hiking.
Every day we're up there, yeah, getting acclimatized a little bit more. So the more you move up, the more your body acclimatizes to the altitude, but you don't want to go up too quickly. So that's the whole purpose of taking a long period of time to get up there. And the concept is to climb high, sleep low. So on our acclimatization days, we would climb to a higher altitude, and then we come back down to sleep at a lower altitude. The next day we'd move up to that altitude, and then again, climb high, sleep low, and we kind of just leapfrog our way up the mountain that way.
What's the point of sleeping low?
That's when you recover. So when you expose yourself to the higher altitude, your body is forced to produce more red blood cells. So when you go down to a lower altitude to sleep, that's when you recover, and that's when your body is after doing the acclimatization is when you're sleeping and resting. So without that, your body has no chance to properly acclimatize. If you go up too quickly, you have to give your body a chance to rest and to get the red blood cells produced, and then you can go up to a higher altitude.
All right. Then what happened here?
There's our little yaks again. Yeah, so they get kind of tired. So they're the real workhorses of trying to move gear and food.
Oh, are these your yaks for your expedition?
I don't think he was actually one of ours, but he was one of the expeditions that was going up. Yeah, so he just decided to have a break in the middle of the trail, and we could not move him. So we decided to kind of move around him, but You have to be a little careful though, because sometimes the yaks can get aggressive if there's a lot of people surrounding them. So we kind of tiptoed around the back of him, and then as soon as we were around, then we kind of bucked it past him. But yeah, he just kind of sat there and would not be moved. So there's yak herders that will try to get the yaks moving along. The yak herder couldn't even get this guy to move, so he was just having a little break there.
How many yaks would you have per expedition?
So for our expedition, we would have had probably a couple of dozen yaks bringing gear up, because it's a 2-month expedition, so a lot of stuff has to be brought up to base camp. So yeah, it's the most efficient way. There are helicopters that we use too to bring gear up. Like the food that we have while we're at base camp is brought up via helicopter because it's quicker. But most of our gear is brought up by yaks. So yeah, there's a lot of gear, a couple of 1,000 pounds of gear per person that needs to be brought up.
Are you still carrying your pack loaded up with gear?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's
You
part
carry
of
your pack up, but you kind of split your gear up. So we had our stuff that we needed for the base camp trek. And then the stuff that the yaks bring up is the mountaineering stuff that you would need from base camp onward. So we don't need that stuff on this trek. So there's no point in carrying it. So the yaks take that up. It's at base camp when we get there. And then we just carry our stuff that we need for the 2 weeks to get up to base camp.
Now, where are we?
Oh, so this is beautiful Amidst. This is a very iconic mountain in the Khumbu. There's a glacier that you can see if you look closely enough. There's a glacier at the top, and then the mountain comes down and swings out like this, and it looks like mother's arms. So that's kind of the translation of Amidst is the mother's arms are welcoming you. So you can see the two arms kind of scooping down, and then the glacier at the top there's a little face in it. If you look closely enough, there's like two eyes and a little mouth. So it's the mother's necklace, and that's her arms welcoming you. So yeah, this is the view that you get about half of the way up to base camp. Amidst is somewhere in your field of view, and it's just such a beautiful mountain. And then you've got the river that flows up all the way from the airport to the bottom.
And where is Everest in relation to this?
Behind and up.
Behind and up.
So,
okay.
So as you're making your way up the Khumbu Valley, this is about halfway up. And then once you pass Amidst, then you can start to see the other mountains that are in the chain of where Everest is. So yeah, Everest is still quite a ways beyond that.
Okay. And you have this in your sight line for how many days?
A good week.
Oh, wow.
And so all of our acclimatization hikes are kind of around that area as well. So you can kind of see, and it's an easy marker to know where you are in the valley because Amidst is usually somewhere off to your right. Yeah, so the first week, wherever we were, we could basically see this beautiful mountain.
Here's another beautiful mountain.
This is just the view that you have every day going up the valley. It's just stunning. It's almost hard to put yourself in that spot because everything is just so enormous. And this is your view that you get every day on the way up. And it's kind of jaw-dropping to be in that environment for that long.
How does that compare to your other expeditions? Have you ever had an acclimatization that lasts that long, or is this
acclimatization that long? No, this is the longest acclimatization. But I mean, really, any mountain that you go on, you're acclimatizing as you go. So even for Denali, for instance, you're there for 3 weeks, and Denali is just over 20,000 feet. So altitude-wise, sure, you could climb it if you were acclimatized in probably a week, but the 3-week time frame is to get you acclimatized to go that high. So that's the thing with the acclimatization. You're acclimatizing on a mountain every time you're on it. So even 2 weeks ago, I was out in Vermont and New Hampshire climbing, and even if you go to 8,000, 10,000 feet, you don't want to rush into that. You want to give yourself like a day or two because you can get altitude headaches and some nausea in that. So anytime you're on a mountain, you do need to give yourself time. So yeah,
you're back to climbing again?
Yes.
Whoa. And how long since you had your surgery, your knee surgery?
It's been 3 months.
Okay.
So it might have been a little quick because it didn't feel great when I was away, but it was a good test just to see where I was. And I've got some stuff coming up later this year. So I just need to see where my fitness was at. And I've got some work to do for sure. And a little bit of healing still left to do.
Well, do you want to share what your goal is for this year?
Well, so I'm actually going back to ultra for this year. So I'm going to do Bigfoot 200 mile in Washington State in August. So I've got about 6.5 months to get ready for that. And the elevation on that is really high. It's about 96,000 feet of elevation change in that race. So a lot of I got to do a lot of climbing and just hiking and in the mountains and getting some elevation training in this year. So that's when I started, was just 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Incredible. Okay. Where are we at?
So these prayer flags are all over the Khumbu Valley. And so you pass by these rock formations that have these prayer flags on them. And the idea is you always move so that the prayer flags are on your right, and it's sort of a respect thing. So this is a very common sight as you're going up the valley, is the prayer flags. And sometimes they're draped across mountain tops to other mountain tops. And you go underneath them and you sort of say a little prayer to, the mountain gods to give you safe passage. So again, this is another thing that you would see constantly on your way up the valley.
And here we are. Is it base
Base
camp?
camp. So this is our main kitchen tent eating area. And the one directly beside it is where the cooking goes on. All of our tents are sort of surrounded around. So, I mean, base camp kind of encompasses a circle for us where our team is. So there's tents behind that. That's another team's camp behind us there. So you come up through the valley into base camp, coming from the top of the screen and in. And then all of our tents are kind of in a semicircle surrounding this. So that's our main eating tent. We like that tent. They had a nice fire in there. It was the only place, not fire, but I mean it was a heater, but it was the only place to keep warm in camp.
And approximately how many people were in base camp?
So climbers, there was 10. Base camp staff, there might have been around 35-ish. And that includes your porters, it includes the base camp cooks, it includes your Sherpas, it includes your guides. So the team in total would have been probably close to 50 people.
Okay. And were there other teams?
Yeah, there's other teams surrounding you. So this yellow and purple tent is our tent, but you can see tents behind that are white and yellow, and that's another team's camp. So each team would be a different size depending on how many climbers they had. Ours was a fairly small group. There's some teams in camp that can have, 30, 40 climbers. So they can have 100 people in camp. So their setups would be a lot larger. I chose to go with a smaller outfit just to make it more personal and
I'm wondering how
better
many.
feel.
Yeah. I'm wondering how many people would be at base camp at any one time.
In peak season, there could have
Mhm.
been close to 1,000 people in base camp at one time. There's roughly now like a 60-65% climber to Sherpa ratio. So there was a lot more Sherpa and staff in base camp than climbers. So of the people that summited, there was about 220 climbers that summited this year, but there was almost 600 people in total, which included all the Sherpas that summited as well. So a lot of people were able to make it to the top this year. But of the permits, though, there was almost 500 permits that were issued, and there was 220 people that summited. So a lot of people ended up going home throughout the season for various reasons, illnesses. So about 220 climbers were actually able to make it to the top this year.
Is that kind of a normal
It was a little bit lower this year because it was such a frigid year and it was a lot of snow. It was a very snowy year. So that contributed I mean, there's been analysis done after the fact to try to figure out what the ratios mean. And something that came out was just, it was super cold and it was a lot of illnesses that came out, mostly respiratory illnesses that caused people to go home early.
Is there a bug going around?
Lots of bugs. I mean, I caught it several times. I was on antibiotics a couple of times while I was at base camp. And there was a couple of people on our team even that had to be sent home from respiratory illness. And there was one that had a blood clot and other illnesses. So it hit every team. It's just, there's no telling who it's going to hit. I would say we probably fared better than most, maybe because we had a small team. But of our team, 6 of our climbers were able to summit of the 10.
6.
So that was a pretty good ratio.
Yeah. Is it harder to recover from a bug when you're at altitude?
Yeah, the thing with being at altitude is you don't really recover, and it's hard to rest there. So your body is deteriorating the longer you're at altitude. So to try and recover from an illness when you're up there is actually pretty difficult. So that was, I think we kind of touched on this before in the other podcast, was I did spend a week down at a lower altitude before our summit push, and that was again to try and get our bodies a little bit healthier, to recover from these illnesses, to get some rest, some sleep, and then we came back to base camp, and then we did our push up to the summit from there. So yeah, it's pretty important to get that rest because you can't really get it even at base camp. I mean, base camp is at 17,500 feet, so it's still a pretty significant altitude, and you just can't get the rest that you need at that altitude. So we went down for a week to a lower altitude, 11,000 feet, came back up to base camp, spent a couple of days, and then made our push to the summit from there.
Right. And here you are.
Yeah, climbing on the ice. So right around base camp, actually, there's a massive glacier there. So we do a lot of just work while there's a lot of time at base camp. There's a lot of downtime at base camp. So what you do in your downtime is you just practice your skills, you get on the ice, you just keep fresh, keep your muscles as strong as you can. So we had a lot of days just doing that kind of stuff, climbing up and down the glacier while we were in base camp.
And how long are you at base camp?
So from base camp to the top was about 6 weeks. So actual climbing time, probably spent 20 of those days climbing, actively climbing, and the rest is the training that you do in base camp just to keep things fresh. And then acclimatization hikes, of course, back and forth.
It's gorgeous.
So that's Pamori. That is another mountain just sort of behind where base camp is. Yeah, just the sights are absolutely incredible. And it's every day you could take pictures like this pretty much every day you're up there. So that was one of our mornings coming up.
There we go.
Oh, more climbing, ice climbing. It's funny. If you were to ice climb here at sea level, it would be a good fun day. Ice climbing at 17,500 feet is exhausting. Just the level of energy that you have to expend to get up that wall. So again, it's a good thing just because it does take so much energy to keep doing it every day to make sure that you don't deteriorate too quickly and your muscles are still as strong as you can make them. That was an activity that we did pretty much every day that we were at base camp.
How many hours would you spend doing that sort of activity?
That kind of activity, probably like 2 or 3 hours, and then our hikes could be up to 5 or 6 hours. And then we come back to base camp and then we just, crash for the night. But that was a typical day, is that you would do either an acclimatization hike or you would do stuff like this. You would do ladder work, just trying to keep your skills fresh.
What about eating?
Eating was a breakfast, lunch, dinner thing, and any time in between that you could. So appetite is a real funny thing. Because the blood is being diverted to working muscles, your appetite, your digestive system kind of takes a backseat. So it's kind of hard to eat sometimes, and your appetite is definitely suppressed. So when you do feel like you can eat, you eat as much as you can, because there's no way that you can possibly replenish the calories that you're burning and the fat that you're burning being at altitude. So my starting weight to my ending weight when I came home, I was more than 20 pounds down when I came home. And that's very common for being at altitude. So you do eat as much as you can, but you just can't replenish what you're burning. So even though this might have been a 2-hour day, I would have burned way more calories than I could possibly eat. So whenever you feel like you have the appetite, just keep stuffing it in. And snack in the afternoon, snack in the evenings. Yeah. When you can eat, you eat.
This is your team?
This was our team. This was another acclimatization hike that we did. So actually, if you look at the picture in behind, Everest is the top peak that you can see kind of sticking up to the left. Okay. The one directly in the middle behind us, that's Lhotse. And the one directly in front of us or behind us to the left, to the right, is Nuptse. So that creates your Everest horseshoe. So if you're looking at it from the top, you've got a horseshoe that's Everest, Lhotse, and Nuptse. So those are the 3 big mountains that you see. And that's right directly, base camp is directly beneath that. So that's sort of your view when you're looking up, is the Icefall and then those 3 mountains behind you.
Massive mountains. Whoa.
Yeah. So this is the center of base camp. So we have a ceremony called the puja, when a lama comes and he asks for safe passage up the mountain. And it's about a 3-hour ceremony that we have. And so everyone sort of gathers around and the lama does his prayers. And then we drape prayer flags across camp. And then whenever we leave camp, we always go around this and we go so that it's on our right side. And when we come in, it's always on our left side. So that was the ceremony that we had just before we left to climb up.
Is the Lama a resident Lama?
He is the High Lama of the Khumbu. So we ask him to come and do our puja and our ceremony. And then he blesses us, and he's putting a little piece of rice in my hand. And rice is a staple in Nepal. So the thought is you put the rice, and I actually have it still taped inside my helmet, and you just take it with you. And then the prayer flags I also just had in my backpack whenever I climbed up. A little bit of maybe superstition, but I had the rice in my helmet and my prayer flag with me the whole time. The ladders. Lots of ladder crossings in the Khumbu. So this is the Icefall that you go up from base camp to camp 1. There's many sections where there's crevasses that open that you need to cross ladders in order to get from one side to the next. So some of the crevasses are so deep that if you look down, you can't see the bottom of them. So when I was training, actually, I did train ladders here at home. And the focus, what I was trying to do is just focus on the rungs of the ladder and not look beneath, because it can, be a little intimidating to try and cross a ladder when you can't see the bottom. So yeah, just trying to focus on where my feet were in the rungs and just very slowly get across. So we do have 2 ropes that go across on either side. So we do clip in our safeties on either side. So if for some reason you did fall off the ladder, your safety should catch you. But you are clipped in on both sides just for safety. So then you cross the ladder and then you just climb up that little ice wall there and then to the next section. And so this particular ladder crossing, I'm not sure if I gave you a picture of this as the season progressed, but this was one ladder. As the season progressed, there was 2 ladders and then 3 ladders and then 4 ladders lashed onto this one particular crevasse because it kept opening wider as the season went on. The Icefall is a slow moving river of ice, so it's constantly moving. So it shifts about 4 to 5 feet every day. So the ice blocks that you encounter on one day could be completely different than what you encounter the next day. So the ladder crossings do change as the season goes on. So this particular one, they had to just keep adding ladders because the crevasse kept opening wider and wider. And that happened with most of the ladders in the Icefall throughout the season.
Now, where are those lines attached to that are attached to you? How do they break your fall?
There's anchors that they screw into the ice. So there's anchors behind, there's anchors above. There's also anchors on each side of where that ladder is. So it is anchored into the ice, but it is ice, so it can shift. And especially because the Icefall is shifting every day, those anchors can shift. So before you get on the ladder, you do have to check the anchors to make sure they're still stable. And if they're not, you got to reattach them to a different spot, re-anchor them. So that is done before you cross any ladder in the Icefall, as you make sure that the anchors are stable.
Right. Now, is that whose responsibility is that to do that, to check those anchors?
Typically, that's our Sherpa's responsibility, but as climbers, we have to be comfortable with, doing that ourselves, because you can trust somebody. But again, as more people cross that ladder, that can shift. So by the time I get to it, it might have shifted from when it was actually checked originally. So I personally checked all my anchors before I went on a ladder. We always tried to go through the Icefall really early in the morning. So we'd leave at 1 a.m. and we'd go through in the coldest part of the night so that it's more stable at night. So when the sun comes and it hits the Icefall, it does warm up a little bit. So then things do shift a little bit more during the day. So the idea was that you want to be out of the Icefall by the time mid-afternoon or early afternoon hits. So we'd go early in the morning, we'd climb through until we got to our camp. And it would take about 10 hours or so to get from base camp to camp 1. So you'd climb all through the night, through the morning, and you get there, probably lunchtime-ish or 1 o'clock, so that you're out of the Icefall when it's at its warmest.
And then what? Do you sleep?
You get to camp, you make camp, you eat, you try to acclimatize, you walk around, and then you just rest. There's a lot of resting time that you need because even though our days, it's a long day, it's like a 10-11 hour day, but you're so physically exhausted, you do need to rest. So anytime that we weren't actively climbing, for me, I was in my tent just horizontal, trying to get as much rest as I could and try to eat as much as I could and drink, and then sleep at night if you could. Sometimes you can't, sometimes you can. It's kind of the luck of the day. But anytime we weren't actively climbing, I was a champion rester. This is the Icefall. So this just gives you a little bit of a view. As you're going through, there's a little wall that we have to climb. There's a lot of those little walls. That's maybe 30 feet high because you kind of go down and come back up again. So the journey from base camp to camp 1 is a lot of this type of stuff and a lot of ice blocks that you're climbing through. So this actually is our team as we progress through the Icefall. We're not typically carrying or climbing as a team. You kind of climb individually, so you eventually spread out. And sometimes you're alone for the whole day climbing, which is really, really wild. There's such a silence to the mountain that's so absolute that it's pretty incredible to be there by yourself.
Do you feel safe that way? Are you doing any ladder crossings or any kind of
Yeah,
precarious...
we're still doing ladder crossings. I did have a Sherpa that climbed with me, my climbing Sherpa. So I was always, the two of us were always a pair together, which was great.
Yeah.
So that you have someone, because it is safer, obviously, traveling with a partner. So yeah, your team kind of spreads out, and then you each have, a climbing Sherpa that will accompany you just for safety on the mountain.
And the yaks, where are they? They at base camp, and that's that?
The yaks stop at base camp. There's no yaks up here.
Okay, yeah.
The yaks go to base camp.
I don't think the yaks can make it over the ladders.
No. I don't think I'd want to see that, actually.
Yeah.
So this is the Icefall again. So this just gives you more of an idea of what the ice blocks look like. So the ice blocks are called seracs. And a serac, they can be the size of apartment buildings. Some of them are just massive. So these seracs shift each day. So as you're in the Icefall, you can actually sometimes hear the cracking of the ice and the shifting of the ice. Kind of like if you're in the forest at night and the trees are rubbing together and you can hear that squeaky, squeaky. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The shifting of these ice blocks is almost like a crash as they're crashing together. And if there is a piece of ice that falls down into the crevasse, it crashes in the crevasse. So you can hear these massive crashes underneath you, and the earth is shifting under your feet.
Is that unnerving?
Yes, it is very unnerving. And I want to say the more you do it, the more you get used to it, but I don't think I ever really got used to it. I think you get a little desensitized the more you do it. That the first time you hear it, it's kind of like this big thing, like, oh my goodness, am I gonna fall and it's gonna collapse? But no, the more you hear it, the more desensitized you get. But I don't think I ever fully became comfortable with it. It is a very tricky area of the mountain to climb through. You want to be as swift and as efficient as you can be going through the Icefall, and to get through it as fast as you can without rushing, because if you don't want to rush and make mistakes, because mistakes can be fatal. So you want to be just consistent and get through it there as quickly as you can and be as efficient as you possibly can.
Because it's shifting?
Even doing that,
what's the purpose of the efficiency? Is it because it's shifting?
It just is shifting, and just as the day progresses, when the sun hits the Icefall. So when you start at 1 a.m., when you get the Icefall starts to light up at 7, 8, 9 o'clock. As the ice warms the Icefall, it shifts more. So the most stable time to go through the Icefall is when it's dark and when it's coldest. So you want to try and get through there before it warms up. But even being efficient, still took 9 to 10 hours to get from base camp to camp 1 at 19,500 feet. Yeah.
Does anything in your training actually prepare you for that, for the grueling nature of those days?
Yes, I would say because of prior experience on other mountains. Not to the extent of the Icefall, but just the long days of climbing. So Denali, for instance, we could have climbing days that were just as long, 12-hour climbing days. And we'd have to get to our camp, we'd have to shovel and break camp and put your tents up and cook. And so, days are very long on that mountain as well. So I think prior experience does definitely condition you for the long days. I don't know that there's anything that would prepare you quite for the Icefall, though. I think that's a very unique formation that you wouldn't encounter really in many places. Mm-hmm. I've climbed ice walls before in Antarctica and again on Denali, but they're just different here. They're bigger, and they're just more strenuous because the altitude is so high. Yeah. This is just climbing through the Icefall again. So you can kind of see fissures and cracks in the ice up there. So that, just using that as an example, say a week from that point in time, that fissure could be, 5 times as wide. So that's just a hole that's being created as the ice is shifting. And so that's what happens to it. So that actually, if that were to continue down, that would create a crevasse underneath us. So there are hidden crevasses that we could be actually over a crevasse right at that moment that we didn't even know about. But that's actually how they start. And then they would just continue down, and then they would just expand wider as the season progressed and it gets warmer into the icefall.
Are you
So that,
roped into anything at that point?
yeah, you're roped on. So there's, I don't
Okay.
know if you can see it, but there are ropes that are secured into the mountain. So every time you're on the mountain, you are clipped into a fixed line. And then you go to an anchor point, you unclip with a safety, and then you clip in to the next anchor point. So yeah, you're
Okay.
always clipped in wherever you are on the mountain.
Right. So even though it's shifting, there's still something that's anchoring you to
There
what's beneath you.
is, yeah. So they don't usually go more than about 30 feet between anchors. Again, because anchors can shift too. So if you do fall, you hopefully will only fall to, you know, the last anchor point. So yeah, the distance between anchors isn't long. So that if you do happen to slip, then you will be at least caught by the last anchor point that you passed.
Did you fall at all?
I did.
You did?
I did actually. Yeah, that was what prompted my knee surgery.
Okay. What
Yeah,
happened?
it was on the descent actually from Lhotse. So it was the very last day of our climb. And Lhotse is a very steep mountain. You have grades between 50 to 80 degrees on Lhotse. And it's because of it, when in that other picture that we saw, Lhotse is just a sheer ice face. So when you're going up and down, you're actually climbing just blue ice. So it's very slippery. So if you get, you know, a sheer angle and ice, it's sometimes difficult to get crampon points in. So this was on the descent. So this was, you know, after being on the mountain for 2 months. And this was the last day. We had summited Everest, came back to our hike camp, summited Lhotse, and this was on the descent from Lhotse. So I was coming down and I couldn't get a foothold with my crampons. So I started sliding down the ice. And as I started sliding, I lost grip with my hand and I slid down about 40 feet until the next anchor. But my leg was caught in the rope. So when I hit the anchor, it just tore. It tore my knee. So that's why I ended up having surgery. Was the very last day of our climb. So,
Your
you know,
knee
luckily
was
anchor
torn
point,
and you had how far did you have to go after
that was
that?
at about 24,000 feet. So I still had to get down to camp 2, which is at about 21,500. And then from there, I still had to go to from camp 2 all the way down to base camp the next day. So I still had quite a way. I had about 7,000 feet to go on that. And I honestly, I think it was more adrenaline and just the whole, like what we had just done the day before and the day before that, that I was not realizing the damage that I had done to my knee. And I came home and I actually started running again. I had a
I
race
know.
with my daughter
How do you
and
do that?
I didn't
The
feel too
heck?
bad. But then I think just the impact of running it was enough to just make it tear off completely from the bone. So that's why I had to go in and have the surgery in October. But yeah, I was lucky that I only had that one incident on the mountain, and it was the very last day.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
had
Coming
happened then and not
down.
the beginning,
Coming down.
coming down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the descent is a lot more, there's a lot more danger in the descent than the ascent, partly because you are so physically exhausted coming down, having climbed for 2 months, having summited 29,000 feet, and then having summited Lhotse the next day, 28,000 feet, and then coming down, your body is just completely tapped out. So a lot of accidents do happen on the descent from mountains. And this just happened to be one time for me.
Oh boy. And do you hike out after that?
We did, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So how many days was it in total after you injured yourself that you had to get out and then get to
Four,
Kathmandu?
four,
4
4 days.
days.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think though, after I got to camp 2 though, so the descent from Lhotse is at 28,000 feet, camp 2 is at around 21,500-ish. When I got to camp, I think there was just such relief at having descended and made camp. And then I think it started to sink in like, wow, I actually just climbed and summited the highest mountain in the world. So I think I was on a real high
Mhm.
and didn't know what was happening within my body.
Yeah.
And I was just so happy and so elated. And the next day, actually leaving camp 2, and we go all the way back down to base camp through the Icefall again. And I must have had like a permanent smile on my face, because I was just in such I was on cloud 9, honestly. I was in such a good mood. So yeah, I don't think I realized what had happened until afterwards. So this is one of the ladders. This is actually that section that we saw earlier. This is now, it looks like there's 3 ladders on that one. So the crevasse underneath has obviously widened to the point where we had to add more ladders on.
Right.
So this particular section did have a 4th ladder by the end of the season. So I think there's 3 of them to attach there.
This is the same crevasse as this?
Right. That's the same crevasse. So it just gives you
Okay.
perspective of how it does shift and how it does widen.
Oh yeah.
As it goes on.
Yeah.
So we might have touched on this before. When we left base camp to go on our summit bid, there was a collapse in the Icefall, and it was actually that section that had the 4 ladders. It widened to the point where the ladders just collapsed in the crevasse, and they couldn't reattach the ladders across. So they had to do it on another section, and we had to actually bypass that section afterwards. So it was just a very unstable part of the Icefall, and it was probably the most dangerous part that we had to go through. And we actually went through it up 4 times and down 4 times. So that was the most unstable part. So yeah, before our summit bid, that actually collapsed. And so we had to create a new section of ladders in a different part of the Icefall and kind of route around it. So we bypassed this section completely on our last rotation up.
Does any of this rattle you when you're on the mountain? And if so, how do you handle that?
I would say yes and no. You try not to let it get to you. I mean, there is fear. Obviously, you have to have fear. Otherwise, you'd be foolish not to have fear. But you can't let the fear get to the point where you can't progress. So I think you have to keep your fear in check. And again, you rely on your experience and just your comfort of being in the mountains, that you know what you're doing, and you've got the skills to make it through. You've got the fitness to make it through. You've got, Sherpas, you've got your team there helping if need be. So I think putting it into perspective in your mind, you know that there's a risk, you know that there's danger that's always going to be there, but just not letting it get to the point where you can't progress forward. Because I think at that point, if you have that level of fear in that section in particular, you'd be paralyzed with it and you wouldn't be able to move forward. So
what's the self-talk? What are you doing? Like, if you notice that fear's coming up, what are you doing to just keep it at bay?
For me personally, I tend to look at my surroundings and just remember where I am and how grateful I am to be there and how lucky I am to be there and how much I want to be on that mountain. And so I know that's a danger. And I know if I look down, I'm probably my heart's gonna beat out of my chest. But I choose to look at what I'm doing and where I am and focus more on that than the actual scary part of where you're moving.
So just the gratitude for being there.
Yeah. I mean, even now looking back at those pictures, like I just feel so lucky to have been able to do that. Yeah, I mean, the risk is, you try to mitigate risk. Obviously, I'm a very risk averse person. I would not want to willingly put myself into danger that I didn't think I could handle. But just being so happy that I was able to take part in this and to get there and get down safely, I think is a bigger thing for me than the actual fear of what I was doing.
Well, it took you some time too to work up to that level of skill and confidence, right? Because
it takes years,
yeah,
of just repetitive. Like again, I was in the mountains 2 weeks ago. Just you got to keep getting in the mountains and just getting that familiarity and getting that experience of what to do in certain situations, because there's so many things that you probably want to prepare for, but you can't possibly prepare yourself for everything that you will encounter on this kind of a mountain. But again, just drawing on all your past experiences and through ultras too, like being in the mountains with ultras, when you've got to navigate your way and you're there for 4 or 5 days and you're kind of on your own the entire time. You have to rely on your navigation skills. You have to rely on yourself, sufficiency and just being comfortable that you can get from point A to point B. So a lot of it kind of just draws on past experiences that I've had, not just, climbing, but in races too. Just continually putting yourself in those situations and just getting more comfortable with it. So this is approaching Camp 1. So you see there's tents on the sort of the right-hand side near the top there.
Yeah.
That's Camp 1. So that's at about 19,500 feet. So this is at the top of the Icefall. So this entire area that you see, like the snowy area all the way back to the mountains, that is called the Western Cwm. And what I was referring to earlier with the horseshoe with Everest and Lhotse and Nuptse, the section in between that horseshoe is all this massive area, which is called the Western Cwm. It's called the Valley of Silence because the mountains from camp 1 there at 19.5, you're still going up 10,000 feet to the mountains, right? So you're surrounded by 10,000 foot mountains all around you. And the silence is pretty absolute when you're in that little Valley of Silence there, because there's nothing permeating it. Like the mountains are so high around you, there's nothing that can get down to create the sound. It's just the sound of, either the snow crunching or the ice crunching, or there's the odd avalanche going down around you. So this is kind of approaching the top of the Icefall, getting, towards Camp 1 there off in the corner. So this would have been, at the end of a 10-hour day-ish. And you see those tents, and all I could think about was, okay, I get to go horizontal in a few minutes. Actually, no, that's not true. This is probably a good hour between.
That doesn't look like it's a few minutes.
Yeah, it's still a ways away. But I mean, in your head, you're thinking, okay, it's getting there. We're getting there soon.
There's the carrot.
The carrot. So this is just a really good view as you're kind of approaching this one section of what a crevasse actually looks like from a side view. It's pretty wide. This one was, could have been 100, 200 feet deep. I actually have no idea how deep it was. You couldn't see the bottom of it when you're looking at it. So it was pretty deep. And this is a very common sight that you see as you're going up the Icefall. A lot of crevasses that are that big.
Massive.
Yeah. So we did 3 rotations from base camp up to higher camps. So when I was referring earlier about the acclimatization, we go from base camp to Camp 1 on one rotation, and then we go to Camp 2, and then we come back down. The next time we'll go from base camp up to Camp 2, and then try and go to Camp 3, and then come back down. And the next time we will go and do our entire rotation up to the top. So this was one of our rotations, and this was our 1 a.m. alpine start. And this was the beginning of the Icefall. So there is a wall sort of at the end of where the people are, that you have to climb up, and that's sort of the start of where the Icefall begins. So this was one of our rotations. I think it was actually our last rotation up. Not our summit bid, but our second rotation up. This is a great view of Camp 1. So when you look at it, it looks like there's these sections. Those are ice walls. So you have to climb up an ice wall, down an ice wall, up the ice wall, down the ice wall, up the ice wall. So each of those little lines that you see is a separate ice wall formation. So that is encompassing the entirety of Camp 1. So it is actually quite large, because to get from where those beginning tents are to those end tents could take you 45 minutes, because you have to go up a wall, down a wall, up a wall, down a wall. So there's a lot of climbing.
Are these just different teams that are in different
so these are where different teams would set up their camps. So ours actually, it's the farthest one away, of course.
Okay.
But these are just different teams setting up camps in different parts of where Camp 1 is.
And what mountain are we looking at here in the background?
So that's the Nuptse. That's the one that's on the right side. So if you're at base camp looking up, Nuptse is on your right, and it kind of spans about a third or more of the horseshoe, and then it becomes Lhotse, and then Everest is on the far side. So this is still Nuptse that we're looking at.
Is there anywhere like it that you've climbed before that sort of compares to the immensity of this landscape and how small we are as human beings in relation to?
The only thing that I could maybe compare it to is the Alaska range, just from the way the rocks look, the jaggedness of the rocks, the amount of snow that there is on the mountains. But honestly, just the enormity of what is surrounding you, I've never experienced anything like that anywhere else in the world, and I don't know that you could equate that with something other than in the Himalaya, because the highest mountains in the world are in the Himalayas. So it's an experience that I had never had before, that kind of view, that kind of setting. And that was what we had every day.
You're like in a perpetual state of awe.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what it was. It was waking up and you sort of, your tent side view in the morning would just be a couple of moments of, and then you could move on with your day. So this is Camp 2. So that mountain directly behind us, that's Lhotse. So that's the Lhotse face that you would have to climb up.
Okay.
And this is just a night shot. And it was a very windy night, as you can tell by the swirling snow behind there, and clouds. So that was Camp 2 is at about 21,500 feet approximately. So this was our first night at Camp 2. And it was a very frigid, very cold, very windy night. Trying to sleep in your tent on the ice.
But you have all the gear. So do you ever feel cold?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, like I was referring to earlier, this past season was one of the coldest seasons that they've had on the mountain. I just could not get warm. There were days and days on end where I was just in this constant ice block. And especially sleeping, being the only female on the team, I had my own tent. So, which is kind of good and bad. I mean, it's good to have privacy, but sharing body heat in that kind of environment would have been really helpful. So I spent a lot of lonely, cold nights in my tent on this last expedition. So yeah, Camp 2, I mean, we could have been that could have been like minus 25, minus 30 there in the middle of the night. And even though you're in a tent and you have the big sleeping bags and you've got the gear and you're sort of all covered up, there's really no way to warm up that kind of altitude. So yeah, a lot of cold nights I had on that trip.
Are you eating something high in calories before you get into your sleeping bag?
Yeah, you try. I actually had a lot of trouble eating at Camp 2. Just stomach did not want to digest food. So it's more like snacking, high fat snacks, just continually, just little bites, and also making sure that you do have a lot of water and hydration. So when you eat, it sort of gets your metabolism going, so it creates body heat. So that kind of wards off hypothermia. Drinking keeps your extremities moist, which is what can ward off frostbite. So you do need both. They both serve different functions. So water is almost as important as food in those situations because of the cold. So yeah, just trying to get as much of both that you can possibly stomach in you before you actually try to retire for the night. And
Well,
I
you
always
don't want to drink too much because then you're going to have to go to the bathroom.
well, you do anyway.
Oh, okay.
And so
Okay.
that you have your
Oh,
little bag inside your tent so that you don't actually have to leave the tent. Um,
okay.
so I do have a bag, like a little thing that we can use to go to the bathroom inside the tent. So I don't have to leave the tent to go. But I mean, you're doing that anyway because your body's all kind of whacked out. But so yeah, you do have to go to the bathroom, and it's if you wake up and you have to go, don't try to snuggle back down in your sleeping bag again and try to go back to sleep because you won't. The best
Right.
thing to do is as soon as you have that urge, get up, do it, get back in your bed, and hopefully you can go back to sleep again. But I probably would have had like 2 or 3 times a night having to go to the bathroom. So
Yeah, and if you're already cold, and then that whole process of getting out of your sleeping bag is just
yeah, sleeping bag and then
daunting.
having no clothes on, and yeah, you just do it as
Yeah.
quickly as you can.
Yeah. Okay.
This is another view of Camp 2 during the day. So again, that mountain behind us is the Lhotse face. So it doesn't really represent how high it is, but you can see how steep it is.
Okay.
But yeah, that's sort of a crisp morning getting up from Camp 2. And we would have that day tried to go off to Camp 3, which would have been off frame here. It would have been a little higher and to the right, Camp 3. So we try to make our way a little bit to Camp 3 to acclimatize, and then we'd come back down to Camp 2 and rest for the day.
When you summited Lhotse, did you summit from Camp 2 or where did you start?
No, so we go from Camp 4, which is high camp at 26,000 feet. That's our shooting off point to the summit of Everest at 29,000. We come back to that camp at 26,000. We rested for a few hours and then we went to Lhotse from that camp.
Okay.
So you have to cross over. It's called the Geneva Spur. It's this little mountain jutting out in front of Everest. You have to cross over that, come back down, and then the Lhotse High Camp is right off to the side, and then you summit from there. So that all happens within a 24-hour period. So you don't actually go down and go back up again. You come 26,000 and then you go up from there. And then you come all the way back down to Camp 2 after summit in Lhotse. Though. This is Lhotse in your morning alpine glow in its glory. So this actually is about 7,000 feet from where that tent is to the top. So right where those tents are, that's the Lhotse High Camp. So this is on our summit push. So this is above Camp 3. We're at about 24,500 feet right here. So we had gone from Camp 3 up across the yellow band. This was a time that we just took a little bit of a break. The Lhotse High Camp was those tents that you could see. That's the shooting off point to get to the summit of Lhotse. So from there, we would have just crossed over this other mountain and then gone to High Camp. About another 1,500 feet from that spot right there. So this is actually the view down the Western Khumbu, all the way down the Icefall to base camp. This is High Camp. So this is 26,000 feet. This is officially what starts the death zone, where there's insufficient oxygen to support human life. So these are clouds behind us, and those are just the mountains that you can see kind of jetting up behind you there. So this is 26,000 feet. So we stayed here for one night and then would have gone to the summit from this camp and then come back down to this camp. And that's where we would have shot off to get to the Lhotse summit from there.
Okay. So you're only here one night before your summit?
We were there one night, and then the next morning we went up to the summit. Okay. And then when we came back down from Everest, we had, I want to say, like 4 or 5 hours to rest, and then we went up to Lhotse from there. You want to spend as little time in that death zone as possible, because it is really hard physically on the body and the mind to be in that altitude for that long. So our whole entire time above 26,000 feet would have been about less than 3 days.
Okay. And how long can you be there without it being dangerous?
Not much longer than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said hard on the mind. What do you mean by that?
Just because your whole body is being deprived of oxygen. So all your muscles are being deprived. Your brain is a muscle, lungs are a muscle, heart's a muscle. Everything is being deprived of oxygen. So they just don't operate effectively. So sometimes your decisions can be a little off. And so you question yourself, like, is this the right thing to do? How am I feeling? Am I actually really able to determine how I'm feeling? Am I good to go? Am I feeling okay? And sometimes you sort of second guess yourself because you don't know if you're actually thinking clearly enough. So yeah, it's just when you get to that point, you really want to make sure that you can get down to a lower altitude before your decisions become compromised to the point where you put yourself in danger. When you leave High Camp, there is a section called the triangular face, which is a pretty steep section that you go up to that leads you to the balcony. The balcony is kind of a halfway point between camp and the summit. It's at about 27,500 feet. This was the morning. This would have been about 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning. So we had left High Camp and we were going up that triangular face towards the balcony. And these are the mountains. You can see Makalu, which is the 5th highest mountain in the world. That's that sort of peak that you can see behind. And you can actually see the curvature of the earth. That's why I love this.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
See the curvature of the earth. So yeah, the sun is just about to come up. So this moment in particular is one that's very, very fresh in my mind because we summited this little section here to get to the balcony, and it's a very steep part, and then it kind of flattens off where the balcony is. And just as I was coming up to crest that balcony, that's when the sun came up, and that was just a few minutes before this shot was taken. So this was a very precious memory to have. And yeah, that shot turned out perfect because you can see the curve of the earth. It's just stunning.
You're so high that you can see the curvature of the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the summit ridge. So in behind, if you look at directly, like in the center of that picture, that's the Lhotse summit behind us. So that's what we're looking at when we're summiting Everest, is Lhotse is behind. And likewise, when we're on the summit of Lhotse and you look back, that's the summit of Everest. So it's a really cool perspective. So this is the summit ridge coming up towards the south summit. So this would have been about 28,500 feet, 28,600. So we didn't have far to go. But at this point, we're probably on the mountain. We're probably out for maybe 9-10 hours to get to that point. And we still had another 400 or 500 feet to go to get to the top. But if you were to widen that shot, it is a sheer drop off on either side of about 8,000 feet. So the summit is a pretty narrow, this channel of rocks here that you have to cross before you can get to the actual summit. So this was like your last obstacle just before the Hillary step is where this picture was taken.
How much longer was it until you got to the summit after this point?
It was about an hour. Yeah, I mean, you can see it at that point, so you know it's close. but you have to keep it into perspective of, okay, I know it's only 500 feet, but it's 500 vertical feet at 29,000 feet of altitude. So it's nothing happens quickly up there. Every step is a step, and then probably 3, 4, 5 gasping breaths, and then a step, and then another 3, 4, 5 breaths, and then a step. So it is a very slow process at that stage, just to try to get your muscles to work to climb. So this is another view. If you look on the left-hand side of that picture, and there's this couloir of snow that you can see going up, that is the Lhotse summit. That is how steep Lhotse is. That's the steepness of what we had to climb up of Lhotse.
It's almost
and that
straight up.
Is almost, it's about an 80-degree vertical angle. So this is coming up just before the summit of Everest. This is at the Hillary Step here. So this is just a little bit past that picture that we just had prior to that. And this is the ridge coming up towards the summit. And you get the full view now of everything surrounding you, because nothing is above you anymore. So you can do a 360 and all you see is, beautiful mountains like that surrounding you.
Nothing is above you.
Nothing is above you at that point. So that's Makalu in the background. So that was the mountain that we saw in that morning shot coming up. And this is just another view of, actually someone was above me taking this picture right before the summit. And this was just another picture of the summit ridge coming up. And you can see Lhotse in the background, and you can still see that couloir, that snow couloir, which is just like a snow gully that goes up. You can see it going up on the right-hand side there. That's the summit of Lhotse on the right. There's a summit. That's a little video of how far we had to go to get to the summit.
Is that another team that's summiting?
That's our team, actually.
That's your team?
Yeah, that's our team. We were the only team on the mountain at that point. We were very fortunate. Our summit day was a calm day. It was still cold, but it was calm, which for that altitude is kind of rare. And there was no one else on the mountain. So we had the whole ridge to ourselves, the whole summit to ourselves. So when we were up there, it was our team alone, and it was pretty special. Yeah. So those people that you saw, those are just team members of mine.
And in this closing shot, are you one of these people up on?
So there's 3 people right near the top. I am the next one. Yeah.
Okay.
So my teammate took this video of us going up.
Fabulous video.
And that's the Hillary Step. That's the final bit of climbing that you have to do before the summit, because it's this kind of rock face that you have to go over and down. And then the last 100 feet to the summit is pretty much just a snow walk. So that's the famous Hillary Step right there.
Where are you?
I'm that little speck in the middle. I had just gotten over the step and I was going up.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
Ta-da!
ta-da!
Nothing is above me there. Yeah. So we were alluding to the prayer flags earlier. There's prayer flags on all the summits of the mountains, and that's a common occurrence for a Sherpa when they get to the summit is they put a prayer flag on the summit marker to say thanks for safe passage. And so yeah, we were surrounded by a lot of good feelings.
Yeah. How did it feel?
Wow. That's kind of a loaded question. A lot of relief being there, almost disbelief that I was there, but also not celebrating too much because I knew that the descent was the hardest part. So you can't let your guard down here, because you need to be completely focused for that descent. So I do remember feeling just that elation of, oh my goodness, how many years of, preparation got to that point, but also thinking, okay, the celebration happens when I get down. Right now I can sort of take my half hour, 45 minutes, whatever time I had up there, soak as much as I could in, and then just be as conscious and be as aware as I could be to get back down again. So yeah, we had our moment, and I had a few tears, and then we turned around and we went back down.
Yeah, and then you knew that you had this next mountain to do.
Right. So I wasn't actually thinking of Lhotse at this point.
Okay.
That couldn't happen for me mentally there. I didn't deal with that until I got back to my tent, because that sort of was an add-on that if things went well, if the weather held out, if physically I felt like I could, if mentally I was in the right space to tackle that after summiting this mountain, then I was going to do it. So I wasn't even thinking about Lhotse at all at this point. It wasn't until I got back in my tent and I'd had something to eat, and I got out of my clothes and I got into my warm clothes, and I thought, okay, do my head to toe check, do my mental check. Like, am I good? Do I want to commit to this? The answer was yes. So we went. But yeah, that wasn't even a thought at that point.
Right. There's the video.
So here's my summit video. Yeah. That's Makalu. That's Lhotse. That's Nuptse.
So clear.
We had a great day for it. It did get a little cloudy after this, so we summited at the right time. It was about 9:30 in the morning, I want to say. 10 o'clock in the morning we were there. It did start to cloud over as we started descending, so it was just the perfect window to be up there to get a little bit of sunshine with no wind. Yeah, we were very fortunate. Our day was really great. That's Lhotse. That's the next day.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you were to turn around from my position there, you can see the Everest Summit Pyramid behind you. And again, just gives you perspective. That is the tallest mountain in that area other than Everest. So there's still nothing above you around that. So you still get the full 360 view when you're up there, like you can get on Everest. This was a windy day for us going up Lhotse, so you could just see the snow and blowing on top of Everest on this summit day here. So it's a really good shot to give you a feeling of how wild that altitude can be.
How did this feel in comparison to Everest, or just something completely different?
A lot harder. I think because I was so tired and so drained, but also it was just a more taxing day. Lhotse is a very steep mountain. Yeah. And that gully, when the wind was swirling, it's just shooting you around from side to side. It's very hard to get like a solid grasp of the ground. And because it had snowed, it was a lot of soft snow. So you would take a step and then you'd fall back a step, and you take a step and you'd fall back a step. So it just felt like you couldn't progress up the mountain. So it just took a lot more energy to get to the top of this mountain. And I think having summited Everest just the day before, I just didn't have a lot left in the tank to give to this. So, I mean, I felt like it was a lot more work to get to the top of this mountain than it was for Everest the day before. But I mean, the feelings of being up there were very similar. The effort level was, for me anyway, it was a lot more than the day before.
Seeing Everest in the distance from there.
Yeah. So I had a moment actually before the sun came up, and I think actually we talked about this in our previous discussions. There was a point where I wasn't sure if I was able to continue on that day. And I did look around behind me and I did see Everest, and the sun was just coming up. And that was enough to kind of click and go, yeah, no, I do want to be here. I do want to do this, despite how difficult this is. So there's just those little moments that you get that kind of remind you why you're there, why you're doing it, why you want to do it. And it just kind of propelled me to keep going until I got to the top. But it was a very difficult day.
How long to get down to high camp from here?
So this day in total ended up being about 17 hours. Oh. So from there back to Camp 2, we didn't go back to high camp, went all the way down to Camp 2 because you do need to get to a lower altitude.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why it was about a 7,000 foot descent from here. So from that point to get to Camp 2 would have been at least another 11 hours, I want to say.
11 hours.
We didn't get there until 6 p.m. So yeah, we left at about 1:30 in the morning, and we got there at 6. So yeah, this was a very long day. So it took about 7 hours to 8 hours to get up, and then yeah, another 11 hours to get down. Yeah.
11.
Yeah.
Were you eating during that time? Could you eat?
That day? No.
No.
My stomach was no part of food that day. I was trying to drink, but it was so cold. Water froze, food froze. Yeah, it was, for me, it was just a matter of get the job done, get down safely. And then when we got to Camp 2, then I was able to eat because it was like finally like made it down there. And so I was able to have some soup and I had a good rest that night. But yeah, food and water that day was kind of scarce just because of the physicality of the day. And just when you're working that hard, it's really hard to digest food. And yeah, for me, it was just a real mental focus to get up and then get down safely. So food was kind of secondary
So
that day.
does your Sherpa or your guide, does anybody, just like a pacer in an ultra, are they trying to get you to eat, making sure that you're eating?
No, that's not their job.
Okay.
Their job is more about safety on the mountain. You are responsible for all your self-care and all your like you're climbing the mountain. They're there kind of making sure that the ropes are, connected and that, but you are responsible for yourself. So I mean, you
Okay.
climb on your own. No one's reminding you to eat or drink. No. A pacer, however, in an ultra, I have had a pacer say, "Eat now," and you do. But no, that's a little different when you're on a mountain.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Now, if you're mentally, I'm just wondering, is there anybody to help, if you're mentally, you think you're okay, but you're not?
They are keeping watch over you. I mean, one of the things when you're at that kind of altitude is you're also watching your teammates. And I'm watching my Sherpas as well. Like everyone is human and we can all succumb to altitude sickness, no matter how experienced you are, no matter how well trained you are, no matter how much time you spend in the mountains. It can hit anybody. So altitude sickness, either pulmonary edema or cerebral edema, which is when your brain starts to swell, it can impact anybody. So we're all looking out for each other. So you do have a climbing partner. So my Sherpa was my climbing partner. So we are kind of together watching each other. But I mean, we're also watching whoever's around you, because if someone gets themselves into a situation of distress, you need to come to their aid. So you need to be physically aware of everyone around you and how they're all doing. So it's not just someone watching out for you. You also have to watch out for your teammates and your Sherpas and your guides and everyone. It's sort of, we're all responsible for each other. And because it was a very small team, there was only 3 climbers that went up that day. And then we had our Sherpa and then we had our guide. So our team in total was 9 people. So we're very small, and we were the only people on the mountain that day on Lhotse. So there was no one else around us, which was really nice. But again, the onus is on each other to make sure that we're all safe. So we do have sort of a collective, we're watching, and if someone starts to stray, or if they can't speak clearly, or if their hands stop working, and any kind of sign that you are in distress, you need to deal with that right away. So you're doing your head to toe, always making sure that you're okay, but also your teammates have to be in your catalog of things that you're doing while you're up there.
And it is life and death, really.
Not to sound dramatic, but it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, there are people that don't make it home, and we passed people right before the summit that, they're still there, and you see them, and that sort of hits you at like, it's real at that point. Like, what can happen. So you just can't let your foot off the gas. You can't take your concentration off what you're doing, because that
you're
can
reminded
happen.
of what can happen to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really brings it home.
Yeah. And I mean, when you see them, I think it's such a surreal moment. It didn't hit me until afterwards. Because I think, again, like, with the fear stuff, if you let it affect you too much while you're in that moment, it can paralyze you, and then you wouldn't be able to get up or down. So you kind of put it in its little box, and I had a couple of words and rest in peace, and then you sort of continue on. And but yeah, like it's a very real thing. It just signifies that what you're doing up there is very risky, and things can happen. Even the best prepared people, accidents happen. So it's you do have to watch what you're doing up there.
You think it'll be the most risky thing you've ever done?
I think so. Well, skydiving could be considered risky. I mean, I've skydived a couple of times. But again, I mean, you look at those risky things, and you look at what safety measures you put in place, and then you kind of compare that to, okay, is it really as risky as it seems, given the safety precautions that you take, and given that you're going with people who are, as experienced as you are and can help. And so skydiving could be considered a risky activity, I didn't think it was that risky when I went. I thought it was a lot of fun. But again, I mean, you've got a chute, you've got a backup chute on you. So precautions, mitigate the risk. You do it safely as you can. So is that the most risky thing I've done? It's the highest thing I've done, but I mean, I've done other stuff that could probably be considered risky too. But I mean, I think as long as you're safe and you realize what you're doing has the potential for injury, just always keep that in mind. Yeah.
So on the way down, after you get to Camp 2,
Mhm.
then what?
We spent the night. So we got to camp at about 6:30 at night. We were able to have a bite to eat for dinner and then went to our tents, slept until 6 a.m, and then packed everything up and then went back down to base camp from there. So all of our stuff had to be brought down from Camp 2 to base camp that next day. So again, everything happened sort of quickly on the way down. We were at base camp the following day after summiting Lhotse.
And did you stay there for a couple of days before you started hiking out?
Yeah, because it was really foggy. So we were waiting until the visibility was better before descending down. Yeah. And once you're in base camp, that's when you can kind of let go and just process what you've experienced over the last few days and what you did. And the celebration, I guess, starts then, but not before then. That, for me anyway, that's when I chose to. Because I felt good getting back down to base camp. I felt like, okay, I've made it through the riskiest part, and now the descent from base camp is not risky. It's a trek. So that was when I allowed myself to actually take in what we had done and be happy about it and start to celebrate. And then it was just like permagrin from there.
So was it another 12 days back?
No, 3.
3.
Descending is quick because you're going back into altitude, so you don't have to acclimatize going down.
Oh, right.
You can go down as quickly as your feet will take you to go down.
Got you.
And you actually physically feel the effects of going back into altitude. Just all of a sudden you can breathe better, like the air is thicker and you're thinking clearer and everything just becomes clearer around you. And it's actually amazing, the feeling of going from that altitude to say 11,000 feet, how different your body feels. You feel like you can just jump to the moon. Like, honestly, I just feel like I was, these deep breaths in and yeah, it was wonderful. So no, going down is very quick because you don't have any acclimatization to do to go down. You're just booking it down. So yeah. And that's why the descent from Everest Summit and the Lhotse Summit to base camp was 2 days. And then from there was 3 days all the way back down. So it's very quick.
Mm-hmm. And then were you in Kathmandu for a few days?
There was 2 days I was in Kathmandu and then I flew out. Yeah. And I was ready to go home by that point. It was a long 9 weeks to be away from the family. And I think being back at base camp, I got a little bit stir crazy. I was like, okay, now I need to go. I need to get home. I need to, be off of this mountain. Although it was hard to say goodbye to the mountain, I was definitely ready to be home.
With your family. How did that feel, seeing your family?
Oh, lots of tears. Yeah, it was a very, very nice reunion when I got home and the kids were here, my husband was here, and it was great because they respected my need to kind of just process things slowly when I got home. And like, it wasn't this mass bombardment of people. It was okay, if you could give me a couple of days, and then sort of people kind of trickled in a few days after that. And then so I had this constant stream of probably 2 weeks of people. It was lovely seeing everyone after I got home, but it wasn't all at once. So I was able to be present with that person that day when I saw them. And then the next day I'd have, a different person that I could share it with. And so it was a really nice homecoming because it was slow and I was really able to take it all in and kind of process it all in my own way, but also share it with other people, which also helped me process, what I had just done and where I was. And just the shock of being in this deep freeze for 2 months to now it was the beginning of June here and it was summer and I'm in my shorts and I'm like, this just feels really odd. Like I was, wanting to put coats on and I felt like I was missing something. But yeah, it was a wonderful homecoming. It really was.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Explore with Lori Ference. I just love talking to Debbie about her expedition and seeing all those glorious photos. It felt like being on the mountain with her, and wishing Debbie the very best in her training for Bigfoot and for all the other peaks she has yet to climb. If you like this episode, please give it a thumbs up, make some comments below, or share it with friends. I really appreciate it. It helps people to find the show. Until next time, bye for now.